Thank
So,
you.
on to our last case study of the day. And after this case study, we will be moving on to the main stage again for our last session. But this last session is the case for virtual production as a sustainable solution. Really, we're going to be looking at reducing transportation and how it can significantly impact a production's carbon footprint. And we've heard this a couple of times today. You know, virtual production can be a viable solution to support sustainable film and television production, but is it really the right choice for all productions? Now I'm going to hand over to the reliable hands of Dee Davison from Deluxe to take the conversation further. Over to you, Dee.
Thank you, Lisa. It's so good to be here to host this panel. I find virtual production is such an exciting area for our industry when we're looking at sustainable opportunities. So it's a real pleasure that we've got three experts on the topic here with us this evening. I'm in the UK. But as we only have 30 minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the panel swiftly myself, because you've all got access to LinkedIn and the speakers' bios, and then we can get on with the conversation. So to start off, so I'm Dee Davison. I'm Director of Sustainability at Deluxe. We're a global content creation, servicing and distribution company. My job is very simply to measure, monitor and reduce our environmental footprint across scopes 1 to 3 with colleagues in 11 countries around the world. I'd like to welcome Phil Holdgate, who is Head of Production Sustainability for ITV Studios. So Phil has got the remit to reduce carbon across all productions globally at ITV, and first used virtual production on a Cold War drama called A Spy Among Friends at the start of last year. Phil Adlam is Head of Explore Stage and Screen, which is based at Production Park in Wakefield. So Explore is an R&D centre looking at innovation in technology and production, and it's got its very own centre for virtual production. And finally, we have Cedric Lejeune, who many of you will know from his days at Workflowers, where he had a workflow consultancy with a big focus on sustainability. And this year, Cedric launched Fast and Young, which is a new company focusing more directly on using data to reduce energy and carbon in our industry. So just a little bit of context, virtual production is such a hot topic right now, and there have been several events recently which have spotlighted sustainability as a big benefit of virtual production. So on this panel, what we wanted to do was look at the areas of growth in virtual production to see where people are getting the most benefit from it from a sustainability point of view. And we'll also look at some of the barriers that might be preventing more people taking it up. So I'm going to jump straight in with a question for Phil Holgate. So BAFTA Albert statistics in the Screen New Deal report tell us that on average 50% of the carbon footprint from a tentpole feature production comes from the transport and accommodation of the cast and crew. So I'm assuming that using virtual production, this would be one of the biggest areas of savings, obviously, but I'm interested in some of the other benefits that you're seeing from a sustainability point of view from the work you're doing with virtual production.
Hi, Dee. Thank you. Nice, easy one to start off with, which is great. Thank you. Yeah, the real excitement initially for us around virtual production was very much dependent on the use case. Probably one of the most obvious and first sort of ventures into virtual production for ourselves at ITV was through the scripted world. And where we saw huge benefit was where we were managing to avoid any overseas travel for something like a second unit shoot, for example. The Cold War drama that you just mentioned there, A Spy Amongst Friends, that was a great example. We were able to do some data analysis and like for like, it showed us something around a sort of 95% reduction in our footprint compared to if we'd have gone and shot that overseas. So I got very animated and excited about the potential for that technology at that point. And we've carried on and looked into that, and we've done some pilot test shoots as well. But there's also some other use cases that are starting to come through. I think sport actually was probably a little bit ahead of the game, not primarily with the video volume walls that we've been accustomed to seeing now, but more blending virtual with green screen and being able to extend sets or sell the impression to the viewer that they're in a different country for a big sporting event, for example. And that's been really interesting, seeing a slightly different iteration of the technology. And we've been able to see things like a reduction in the need for quite so much lighting, for example, where the virtual elements have supplemented the need to bring in some additional lighting. So there's been some technical benefits that have also, in fact, led to some financial upsides as well. But where I get really excited about, and this is where it really stuck with me the first time I ever set foot in a virtual studio, was just the scope and breadth of the opportunities that, from a creative perspective, but also from a production management perspective, that this new technology could give us. And that really shone through when we did a pilot project looking at filming. And we're not the only production company to look into this, but we filmed a sunset scene, and it was on a rooftop, and it was mocked up to be in a different country. So we sort of cheated it a little bit to prove a point, but we did so intentionally. And, we were able to film that magic hour for a good sort of 11-hour day, whereas that would have taken you 2, 3, 4 days of filming if the weather was right and if there wasn't a pesky plane going overhead or any other sort of annoyances that can get in the way of a location filming schedule as well. So for us to be able to control the schedule, but also control the conditions, if the sun wasn't in quite the right place, or we wanted to put it shining through a window or something like that, it was literally just a click of a button on a mouse. So from a creative perspective, super exciting, but also from controlling of the budget and the schedule perspective as well for a production management team. You'd imagine that that's quite enticing for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Controlling the sun when you live in the UK is just like having gold in your hands, really, isn't it? So it's a great skill to have. So if it is producing so many great results from a sustainability perspective, and I'm assuming that's leading to cost reduction as well, we might come on to that later, but what are the barriers? Why are more people not taking this up and doing it? I mean, I know that it is increasing in popularity, but are you seeing there are barriers to shows coming on board, and where are they? What's happening there? What's holding people back?
Yeah, I think this is no different to any other new technology. It is new. It takes a little while for people to get their heads around it. I think one of the barriers that it feels like quite an easy thing to overcome as well, is to just get people in there and see it for themselves. I think once you get your head around it, it's mind-blowing. And I would suggest anyone thinking about this to focus predominantly on a couple of different audience groups, and that's your production management types, your production execs, etc., just to get their heads around the slightly different workflow, the reordering of what you need to do and when. And the devil is in the detail, but also the detail is in the planning, and it's a very different ordering of events. So having that time to spend in development upfront will pay massive dividends by the time you actually get around to shooting, and we learned that the hard way. I'm not professing to have had a magic crystal ball when we had a first attempt at virtual production, but yeah, absolutely, planning is essential, and so socializing that idea to that kind of community whose day job it is to make these types of things come alive, then that's a real sort of a really important step in the right direction, I think, to making virtual production far more readily used and more popular than it already is. But the second part is, let's get some creatives in this space. Like the opportunities. I remember once somebody said to me when I was throwing around a few ideas, he turned around to me and said, "Yeah, the sky's the limit with virtual production." And I just turned around and said, "No, it's not. Literally, there is no limit other than your imagination." So does that then unlock even new types of shows we've never even been able to dream of before? Or does it bring certain types of shows and genres and storylines, and does it make them more available to a whole new group of producers at maybe different budget points as well? Does it make it more accessible? Things like sci-fi, for example, that would historically have a pretty hefty price tag, maybe that's now an opportunity, or elements of overseas filming, like we've said, or different time periods, for example, for more historical type shows. So I just think that the creative opportunities are limitless, which is really exciting.
That's great, thank you. I'm sure that's anyone who's from a creative background on the call should be hopefully salivating right now and looking forward to the opportunities they can go and find out more about. I want to come back to you in a little bit, maybe on that first experience that you mentioned. You might not have done some things that you did again, perhaps a bit later, but Meanwhile, Phil Adlam, I'd like to bring you in and ask your perspective from running a virtual production studio, and your sense of, I know you work across industries more broad than sort of TV and film, but what are the areas you're seeing where virtual production is growing most at the moment?
Yes, thank you. It's nice to see everybody here. That's a really good question. I think there was that initial sort of splash of growth, if you like, that we saw over COVID and big budget films where they sort of literally didn't have anywhere else to go, perhaps, and everyone was stuck in a shed trying to work out how can we make this work. So there was that initial boom moment, and I think some of the technology was proved in those moments. But it was an expensive exercise, and it started to become more mainstream in that arena, and certainly it's happening regularly now. But the areas of growth that we're seeing is actually as those pioneering technologies have started to trickle down and be more readily available, both from a price perspective, but also understanding and people understanding how it can be used. And so we're seeing, like in the commercial side, the unscripted, like Phil was talking about with sports and all those sorts of elements, and also the smaller scripted projects as well. So it really is starting to happen across the board, and most of the conversations that we're having now are as much with the smaller production companies as they are with the big ones, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And what do you think are the key benefits that are drawing people in? Is it the sort of limitless creative opportunity and the budget limitations for some of those type of productions traditionally, or is there more than that?
Yeah, I think there's always the firm sort of fundamental reason for doing virtual production is basically to get accurate lighting and reflections. And if you're sort of comparing it to a traditional green screen workflow, from a VFX perspective, it's quite transformational in that way. I think if you look like a Mandalorian season, for example, if they hadn't used a virtual production technique in that, there'd be close to about 800,000 frames that would need some form of retouching just to remove the green cast from the costumes, reflective costumes. So when you've got these really good use cases, then not only is there the artistic and creative benefits from the lighting reflections on that side, but actually the cost benefits start to come together as well. So we're finding there's some sort of core opportunities where all the stars align, and it really is actually fantastic value, and the sustainability elements come into play massively then as well. So it's quite good. I've got a slide here I don't know if it's worth.
Yeah, I think it would be definitely worth sharing the slider.
Yeah. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
worked. Yeah. These are the kinds of areas that we're finding people are really seeing success in. So we've got like sort of cockpit type areas, so things where people have got a fully reflective surface, and like all manners of vehicles, etc. That's really, really effective. Like Phil mentioned, when people have got skies and you need to control the weather, that's a really powerful option. There's a lot of sci-fi moments, and especially scenarios where the real world doesn't exist, so you can't go on location to do it, and then it's particularly valuable. Places at height where key interactive lighting, perhaps it's a really key part of it. There's a fantastic example with the Bullet Train film that was done here. They managed to shoot pretty much the whole film in just a single carriage, and that was there was virtual production around the outside, so all of the through window shots, everything was all VP, and it's really transformational in terms of the actor's experience as well, how they can see immediate eye lines, and it massively removes the fix it in post problems and scenarios.
That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And do you see any barriers? Like, do you see people coming and sort of being interested but holding back for some reason? Because sustainability in itself, as anyone knows, working in sustainability is generally not the only selling point. There always has to be another driver there to get people over the line. So, what are you finding?
Yeah, I'm personally, all of us here obviously are very passionate about the sustainable aspects, and it's one of the key things that's driving and pushing us forward in trying to make these things reality for people. But I'm always a sort of firm believer that for people to be convinced to take something up and gain the sustainable benefits, it actually has to be a commercial business sound decision as well. And so in these right use cases, we're finding that the commercial business sense actually is the imperative and is actually the main reason to use it, and there is genuine real savings and opportunities to be had. And so then all the sustainability then comes with it for free, which is absolutely fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I want to bring Cedric in now, because I know that you attended a summit fairly recently, where virtual production was a topic of conversation, and people were sharing their experiences of having a go, if you like, or sort of running a production through virtual stage for the first time. And I think it would be really useful to share with the audience some of the feedback that you heard at that conference from a sustainability perspective, and how people are trying to what makes it work basically first time.
So this is we got some feedback from people who've been in production, and as Phil Holgate mentioned earlier, it's all about planning and preparation, and not all productions are ready for that. And right now, obviously, during the COVID, a lot of companies have been trying to get into virtual production, but it was a bit challenging because new technology to get your grasp on and jump into new things. So in some cases, it was a bit too early and too fast to get something very beneficial, and suddenly not prepared enough. And we need to make sure that we don't have a backdraft effect with people getting excited and not getting what they want or wish for just because they are not ready. And again, I'm all aligned with what Phil Holgate said about the preparation and understanding that you have to do much more before. And in some production companies, and French cinema is all about being instant and reactive. It's not very easy to get the whole team to prepare things in advance, because in a lot of situations it's things get on the fly and with the flow, and yeah, obviously virtual production doesn't work so well with that. So it's a lot about training, getting the right people in the game, and also prepare for maybe more training to really get the benefits of that. It's something easier when you have a stable team, people work together often and know each other and trust each other. Then you can get into that. Probably once we get into something more mature, and it will get easier. But right now it's the main topic is to have stable teams and people who know how to operate that and be efficient, because we certainly gain in efficiency in any case, but obviously you generate a lot of stress when you have something that doesn't work so well, on set and all that. So we need to iron out the wrinkles.
Yeah. Thank you, Cedric. That was perfect, by the way. I think your network came back beautifully. So, I think that's really important. Obviously, we don't want people going in and having a bad experience and then, getting put off. So all of those things around training, preparation, and support for the teams that might not have the budgets necessarily to throw everything at their first go. It sounds like it's really key. So just to finish off on that point, Phil Holgate, anything to add from when you started, early last year on this? Any advice to anyone starting out on this?
Yeah, how long have we got? Yeah. Look, ultimately, it was a fantastic experience for everyone involved. It was a really positive outcome in terms of how it looked on screen, but also everyone's experience. They really enjoyed it. What we would do differently if we were going to start again from scratch, and if I would give any advice, would be, and we've touched on the workflow side of it and the planning and prep, but also just giving yourself a little bit of time, not on the first day of shooting, just to get in there. What does it look like once you put all of the components together and you actually see it coming through on a monitor? And just sort of anecdotally on the example of the drama that we mentioned, this was to film outwardly looking from a bar that was supposedly in Beirut. It was across a skyline. And once we got in there, all we could see were the very, very tiny tops of some buildings and nothing else. It was all just sky. But therein lies one of the benefits of virtual production, in that we dropped the whole bar virtually 5 floors and had the perfectly framed shot. So, lessons learned are also some opportunities as well, which worked out really well. What we over engineered was actually the physical set construction for the foreground. We went to the nth degree, spent an absolute fortune as well, from what I'm told, and we just didn't need it. You didn't need it because the virtual production technology was able to sell the impression that we were somewhere without the need for so much physical set to be readily available in the studio itself. So think carefully about how you integrate, and this is really where I think you can sell the magic, if you like, what bits you need that are physical and which bits that you can do virtually. And I think that you're going to build that up with experience, but working with the studio, working with the VP company as well, they're going to hold your hand through that. They've got so much experience and all the top tips and tricks. And then even small things. So there's sometimes strange things that happen with sound that reverberate around the studio. Understanding that and just being mindful of it is useful. And even things like just checking what camera you're using, what the processor is like, what the lens is going to work with this type of technology as well. That's something that we picked up on one of our other projects, and it pays dividends just to do that little bit of a tech check before anybody else turns up and starts getting a bit grumpy and has to go for another tea break.
Thanks, Phil. Some really great nuggets there for anybody who's new to this. So thank you for sharing that. So I just want to, we've got 7 minutes left. I do want to ask one question, which is around hardware and energy consumption, because we are talking about the sustainability of virtual production here, and the Film Paris Region report that was released this year on the environmental impact of virtual production referred to a lack of information available from manufacturers about the life cycle of the kit being used in virtual production. So, Phil, I'm going to direct this one to you, Phil Adlan. From your experience of running a studio and procuring kits to, for virtual production from the manufacturers, are they looking at LCAs for the kits? Like, is the information available? What's the type of longevity that you're seeing with the sort of kit that you're using?
Yeah, because there's quite a few things to unpack in that. I'll try and fit it into less than 3 hours. Yeah, but I think it's a fantastic question there. Thank you. Certainly, manufacturers are looking into LCAs, and we're from the Explore R&D side. We're working with Row at the moment, doing some analysis and studies, both on the consumption as it's being used, but also in terms of total life cycle, and understanding the carbon footprint across the whole use. I think there's a few critical points that we've noted. Actually looking at the numbers, and I think Phil maybe even mentioned this earlier, but I think often there's a perception that all the big LED screens are going to consume a huge amount of power, and therefore that actually causes a carbon issue. And what we found, that's actually been significantly offset by the fact that you haven't needed anywhere near as much lighting on set, and because the LED panels themselves are providing the light. So there is a small amount more power consumption, but we're looking at like sort of 20 to 30% more from that side. And then when you take that into the context of all the other savings, and especially, I mean, in our studio, we have solar on the roof, and we're 100% renewable, etc., from the site wide. So when you take those things into consideration, actually that it's when you look at the facts, it's actually not an issue. So that's been really interesting to see that coming through. And then the other element, of course, is the actual the life of the product itself. And I know a lot of the manufacturers are now not only saying, well, how can we make this product last as long as possible, but actually are there ways that we can reuse components from one generation to the next. And so, for example, the LED module component is completely be disassembled from the frame, and it's possible we've already been doing that in some ways where we can actually update certain parts of it and not have to remanufacture the whole product again. So there's various things like that going into it, and also building them so that they can be recycled in the first place. It's an obvious thing, but it really matters. And then the final aspect, a bit like with the batteries discussion, is that once your battery's finished in your car, you can use that battery somewhere else, or the same thing's happening with the displays. So we're looking at around probably a 6-year onset application until you reach a level of obsolescence, and then beyond that, typically we're finding the screens have still got a 10 to 15 year very usable life, and they typically can be used in signage applications or various other live event displays, etc. So you might, even though you may say, well, it's only going to be used for 5 years here, actually it's got a 20-year lifespan. So it's overall it's actually in quite a good position.
Right, that's very encouraging. Thank you. It's nice to hear. Cedric, I know that your experience of sort of doing digital workflows and content sort of management from a sustainability point of view. Is there anything that you would add there from in terms of advice on what people should be looking at to ensure they're reducing their footprint when we're looking at using like big digital files? I'm not saying that we wouldn't be using them on set. I know that they're also used on location, but from a virtual perspective, what would you say people should be thinking about there?
Well, you have two aspects to consider. Just to ping back on what Phil just said. In fact, you don't need in a situation, you don't need those huge volumes that we've seen, in the videos and Mandalorian and everything. You can have a lot of benefit from virtual production techniques, even sometimes out of a TV, because you put that at the background of a window, for example, and it will save you a great amount of time and everything. So it's all about scaling the setup to what you actually need, and also to ping back on the life expectation of the equipment, depending on what you're actually doing, and the type of setup you can use. Lower quality systems because they are far in the background and everything. It doesn't have to be depending on your production, obviously, but it doesn't have always to be the top quality, super high contrast, super new systems. You can get a real lot of benefits out of equipment if it's well picked. And you talk with a VP company that knows and that has that kind of flexibility, maybe to rent some equipment and all that. And actually, we see that model of mobile setups where you can actually bring the LEDs on the stage and have just the size you need. And I think this model has a lot of future ahead, just because it reduces the cost and gives a lot of flexibility, which you don't expect in the first place. Second thing is I think we have a lot of opportunities with the background content, because right now generating that content takes a whole VFX team to build up in advance, and obviously this takes a lot of time. This takes very high skilled people. Just knowing how to create content. We're using real-time engines of that, which is still very new to a lot of people in post-production houses. So that may generate trouble. Obviously, as we progress, this will be easier and easier. People know about it, but we can start to use content that is already available. People can start to reuse content. You have opportunities for marketplaces, so you don't have to build the content, because obviously in the context of visual effects, the main impact comes from the scope 3. So technically people, going to work and all that. So at some point, you can spend quite a lot of energy and time just building that content, but that content can be reused. And then obviously the what is coming, and we already have companies working very hard on that, is getting AI to generate background content. Obviously, it depends on the level of quality you expect, but sometimes, if you have a camera with a large sensor, maybe it will be blurred out. So, we don't know. It's again, everything has to be planned. And coming from post-production, hearing Phil talking about camera tests is something that I love very much. It's something we have to bring back, those things, just like, okay, we're going to test with the right camera, the the makeup artist, the costumes, the background, all of that, and find the right combination that works for production, works for the budget. And once people get used to that and get used to bring back that energy upfront, then they will save so much, downstream. So that's something I think will have a huge impact.
Thank you so much, Cedric. There's a lot there.